Hello, I'm Neil Fraser, President of Medtronic Canada, and welcome back to the Next 100 podcast. And I'm here with the incomparable Zayna Khayat, Vice President now at Teladoc Health Canada, and former Future Strategist at St. Elizabeth Health. She's an expert on how innovation and technology are changing the game in home care. On today's episode, we'll discuss the path healthcare in Canada needs to take so patients can be more supported than ever before. Zayna, I've recently learned that you started your career actually with the Banting and Best Institute at the University of Toronto, and that you did, in fact, a PhD in diabetes, where you looked at the effects of insulin, studied its role in the physiology of patients. So here we are. It's 100 years since the discovery of insulin. How do you reflect on where we are with diabetes care, and then ultimately with patient care in Canada?
I was reflecting on that with the theme of this podcast, and I'll never forget. You know, I'm a Catholic girl, daughter of immigrants. It's my first time leaving home to go to Toronto to do my PhD in '96. And literally my first week, September of '96, was the celebration of the 75th anniversary at the time of the discovery of insulin at the University of Toronto. And the world's experts all came to Toronto, like the best researchers in the world and practitioners in diabetes and insulin. 25 years later, and wow, how things have changed from, yes, we continue to do research and advanced technology around insulin itself, getting it to people, different dosing, different ways of storing, ways of measuring. But wow, have we really evolved to surround ourselves around the person who has diabetes, maybe stopping it from happening in the first place, reversing it, we now talk about, or managing it in a very different way, and with these multiple modalities. So I think we're on a pretty good trajectory.
You are known as a futurist, and in fact, that was part of your title when you were with St. Elizabeth Health. What do you see in the future for diabetes care and for the care of diabetic patients?
So, first, I'm an applied futurist. So to be clear, I don't just pontificate about the future, but my job is to, see those signals and trends and then translate them into practices, processes, policies, procedures. If I look at, somebody, with whether it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes, I would say the future of healthcare for them is the same as the future of healthcare for everybody. And, kind of collectively, I characterize it around really 6 big areas. The first will be a shift in timing from being reactive and waiting for the symptom or seeing something that can be measured to much more proactive and eventually predictive. The second is around, the precision, the intelligence, the personalization, if you will, of how healthcare is delivered, including technologies. As much as we love science and R&D and it's done amazing things, it's still pretty crude. We still largely have analog approaches and it's one size fits all. So that will be precise, intelligent, personalized, kind of N of one. The third is the location or the channel through which patients will access the services and the products and the tech they need. Very, very facility-based right now, very institution-centered. That will, shift to what I call care anywhere, whether it's your car, your school, your workplace, your house, waiting in line at the airport. It doesn't matter. You don't need to go to the care will follow you. The fourth is around the duration, by which we can see data about what's going on with your body and your life. Because we timeshare healthcare, it's been episodic and intermittent. I would submit the entire medical device industry, the pharma industry, are intermittent industries. They're there for a little slice of your life and your episode, and nobody will be able to stay in business that way. So that will shift to being continuous and really much more integrated, much more team. The fifth is a power shift in who makes decisions about one's health and care from a very paternalistic kind of provider-focused power dynamic to at least shared decision-making. So I call that people-powered healthcare. And then finally, of course, which you know well, is a shift in what we pay for and what, we consider value. And we've largely been paying for stuff, for activities, for visits, for procedures, for equipment, for beds, for pills, and, being able to finally pay for the results. So in the context of a diabetic's life, the result is, they're living the life they want with the health that they want. And the people who touch that get paid for helping achieve that goal.
As you know, we've long been a proponent of this value-based healthcare, which means that instead of selling stuff, as you say, that we would underwrite the outcome and say, look, if it works for you, that we would be rewarded for that. And that actually brings me, to another area of great interest to yours, which is the health system in Holland. You were so excited about that you went and actually worked for Reshape Health in Nijmegen. And I've always observed that Holland as a healthcare system is very advanced in that they are able to actually focus on outcomes of populations, and they reward companies like ours for managing cohorts of patients with specific conditions, such as type 1 diabetes, for example. So thinking about Canada, how do we get Canada to be more like Holland?
I think there's a culture in this country, and I think it goes back to the Dutch East India Company, which I believe, if you took inflation to today, they're a bigger company than Apple. I think there's one piece of this kind of culture and mindset and belief that we can be bigger and better. And when you've got people galvanized around a bigger vision for your own country, a lot of the nitpicking, producer interests, really ego, I think, goes away. And I don't think we're there yet in Canada. And I'm sure you see this more than me. We still have fiefdoms and chiefdoms and, not invented here across provinces. And we just can't afford that across our big, huge, floppy geography to think that way. So I think that's one, is a mindset. I think the other, though, is I'm finding that more and more the people who, touch a lot of the resources and the decision-making about those resources are looking for new answers. I think we're kind of done with the old tools to try to manage healthcare and keep it sustainable. So I think there's just been a renaissance of interest in, different ways of payment. And I think Medtronic has brought a lot of that infrastructure, frankly, to this country. Innovation as a methodology, capacity building around innovation, new mindsets, new capabilities, all those things around creating the new. So I think we're getting there. And frankly, we kind of have no choice. I think the burning platform is a lot hotter than it was even, 2 years ago.
I was really intrigued around your definition of innovation, because we talk so much about innovation in healthcare, and frankly, we're disappointed that not a great deal of it happens. But maybe your definition would be helpful to talk about it this time.
To say you're disappointed that innovation doesn't happen, it's a cognitive disconnect, because the true definition, any textbook anywhere in the world. So the Canadian Council of Academies, I think, has the most simple, elegant one, not just in healthcare. New or better things that create value, right? So what are the key words? New or better. That's nova, right? That's the root word of innovation from, I think, the 16th century. But it's got to create value, which means it's adopted at scale, and you can measurably know that something was actually better than whatever the previous status quo was. And in the medicine context, that's called the standard of care. So new or better over the standard of care, but measurably better. And I often say it's 5x better, 5x either lower cost, 5x better clinical outcomes, 5x better patient and family experience, or 5x better staff experience. Of course, the most brilliant innovations combine those. They can have better outcomes and lower cost and a better experience. That's true innovation. It has to be adopted at scale. And scale is not 100%. It's not even 70%, Neil. It's like 35%. It's a third away up the adoption curve. Once you kind of get there, you can flip over. So what most people call innovation, I find in healthcare, is actually just invention. It's the tech or the new care model or the new whatever. But the algebra is invention plus adoption equals innovation. That's the algebra of innovation.
Let's talk about adoption, because that really seems to be where our issue is. I agree with you that there's lots of great new technologies and processes and ideas, but we don't seem to adopt them, and not nearly as readily as Holland does, or other leading health economies. The conference board has long stated that Canada's a leader in research, but we're a laggard in innovation. And I think it's on the adoption side. But what do we need to do about adoption in Canada?
Countries like the UK and, big health systems like Kaiser Permanente, if the evidence shows objectively that the new thing, whatever it is better than whatever the standard of care is transparently for the public, they have to adopt. You can't invest in health technology assessment and all the, public taxpayer money to, objectively determine is there economic value and clinical value from the new thing, to, make the case for therefore displacing the old. You can't just do that, publish and say, yeah, this is really good for patients in the health system. And then, it's up to you, province, to decide if you want to adopt. So I think that's one, is like, make it non-negotiable that if the evidence shows, you are accountable to the public to adopt. Two is, I often say, although we love the word innovation and it's so obviously great for everybody, in true innovation, when it's adopted at scale, remember, this is something is 5x or more better than the standard of care. Well, that standard of care, the status quo, whatever the current thing is, has probably been the dominant practice for, 10, 20, 150 years. Not very easy to take that away from the producer interests who have, benefited really nicely from whatever that is. So patients usually always win when there's health innovation, but the people around the patient will lose. Somebody gains and somebody loses. And so I think that's a big part of it, is untangling and dismantling the old. We call this creative destruction, right? It's not just destruction, it's creatively destroying and putting it back together, which means value pools have to shift. What happens is, instead of adding on yet the other new thing on top of the old and one more on top of the old, it's easier just to not let new things in. You know what I mean? That's my summary of the state of the state in simple terms.
Actually, it's very interesting when I think, going back to diabetes, when I think of the whole evolution of, insulin management, I'm going to go out on a limb and say adolescent females who did not enjoy injecting themselves with insulin multiple times a day and wanted a solution that was discreet, that was portable. But ultimately, it's really driven by patients. And actually later, the evidence came through that demonstrated, less hypoglycemic events, less visits to emergency for these children, and ultimately improved, protection from the long-term effects of diabetes. Really, it was about patient power, and the funding really came as an instrument to provide equity for all patients, because not all could afford this technology in the early days. And now we have 100% of governments now do fund insulin pumps at some level. And now they're starting to fund continuous glucose monitoring. I think that's an example that we need in healthcare of how things can be driven from patients first, and the whole system wakes up to understand that this, in fact, is one of those 5x improvements.
100%. I mean, just to take the insulin story to the next level further, 3D bioprinted insulin is now a thing. And that was started in the US because the price of, a month's supply of insulin for a lot of families, like they're either going to not eat, go bankrupt, or ration their insulin for their child or for themselves. Well, that's not an option. And so a group of citizen hackers got together and figured out how to get literally the software code to 3D print insulin. And, I think they're now on the market. So you've now disrupted, an entire universe of machinery because, the cost was the driver there, right? Not access or equity or anything. Is that going to really happen at scale? I don't know, Neil, but I'm just saying that example plus your glucose, your insulin pump example, multiply that by thousands and thousands and thousands of patients or parents of children or spouses or whoever who have all the means of production, they have all the data, and the friction to find each other in the world and put their brains together is kind of gone, right? This is this citizen hacker movement, and I don't think anyone has their head around what that's going to do.
So here we are in Canada. We discovered insulin 100 years ago. It still is not available to everybody that needs it. The disease, diabetes, continues to grow, in its prevalence. More recently, we invented the pacemaker at the University of Toronto. Both of these inventions benefited other jurisdictions more than the inventors. So we true to form in Canada, we did the invention, and we allowed others to essentially exploit the innovation involved and take it global. Do you think there's hope for an industry in Canada, based on a wealth of discovery, that an industry could develop here that would become a world beating industry?
I think there is. The one that I think took the lessons from the insulin and the pacemaker story and kind of designed for commercialization from the beginning has been the stem cell industry. So, we have, for commercialization of regenerative medicine and all the cellular type therapies. And to some extent, mRNA type vaccines is a subset of that, in my opinion. I actually think the way they've been doing things so that the invention here that starts with the science, but then, of course, all of the process around how do you get these things into human bodies, well beyond the science, to be a globally competitive center for the world. So I think there's something there. And I also think, the investments in every province, and I think Ontario was probably the leader right at Mars, right where, insulin was given to the first child 100 years ago in the Heritage Center, is so we don't do that again, right? I think we now can go toe to toe in terms of the infrastructure to take science, to commercialize it, sell it around the world and in our own backyard, and bring all the benefits of that economic gain, and flow it back into our own tax base, if you will, that ultimately then funds public goods. So I think we're okay. I don't think we're going to have that problem again. But I will say, not adapting your made here inventions in your own backyard when the rest of the world absolutely is salivating to have them seems very odd to me. You'd think your home country should be your first adopter. So that's a bit of a disconnect that we still need to work through. And I think it's linked to our earlier discussion about why Canadian health systems struggle with adoption.
I agree with you. I think it is the same phenomenon that whether invented locally or not, the demand for innovation here is very weak compared to other jurisdictions. And that, I think, does correlate with the Commonwealth Fund survey that shows us as being behind in things like efficiency, in equity, in quality. All of these things, I think, could be fixed by more of an adoption of innovation. I'd like to thank you, Zayna. It's been absolutely fascinating, and you're full of amazing insights that just resonate, I'm sure, with people that are listening. So thank you very much for your contributions today. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Neil. That was a lot of fun.